Hundreds of civilians have been killed in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv since the start of the conflict by indiscriminate Russian shelling. In a new report, Amnesty International accused Moscow of routinely using internationally prohibited cluster munitions and scatterable mines. The human rights organisation said the decision to use such weapons showed an utter disregard for civilian lives and could constitute war crimes. The Kremlin has previously denied using cluster munitions in Ukraine and insisted that Russian forces have only struck military targets. From the city of Kharkiv, Weira Davis reports.
From the very start of this war, the city of Kharkiv bore the brunt of Russian shelling. Often indiscriminate and wildly inaccurate. This at a junction outside a large public hospital. In Saltivka, one of Kharkiv's northern suburbs, there's barely a building undamaged. In these areas, says Amnesty International, the routine use of unguided rockets by Russian forces in built-up residential suburbs resulted in hundreds of casualties. Those who survived the onslaught left. Those who now return do so only briefly.
It was horrible, horrible. When the Russians were firing, you would get thrown into the air from your chair. It's hard to describe, but that's what it was like.
20 miles from the border, Kharkiv was a key Russian target in the early weeks of the war, and they literally threw everything at this city, including widely banned weapons, indiscriminate by their very nature.
The world has made these weapons illegal because they are so devastating and indiscriminate and mainly affect civilians. There can be no reason legally or morally to use cluster munitions in Ukraine or anywhere else.
This demonstrates the indiscriminate destruction that cluster munitions can bring. A large shell explodes, casting off dozens of smaller bomblets. As they then explode over a certain area, they shower people and buildings with thousands of pieces of shrapnel. In this case, Kharkiv's Children's Hospital. Some of those struck down by cluster munitions and Russian shells are now recovering in city hospitals. There was a hole in my leg the size of a fist, says Roman, who tells me how he fell to the ground, convinced he was going to die, as several other cluster bombs exploded around him. According to the regional medical director, more than 600 civilians have been killed and 1,200 injured in Kharkiv alone. The material damage to this city's infrastructure too is obvious, all of which, says Amnesty, may constitute a war crime. Weira Davis, BBC News, Kharkiv.
Joe Inwood is in queue for us. Let's talk to him now. This is just the latest in a long list of accusations of war crimes against Russia, isn't it? But it is a hugely damning report, this.
Yeah, absolutely, and very credible as well. Cluster munitions are very easy to detect. That's because when they hit a hard surface, they leave, as we saw in Weira's report there, a very distinctive pattern, basically a central crater the size of your fist, and little fans of marks, pock marks going out as these munitions explode. And what those are is shrapnel. And what they're designed to do is to spread that shrapnel across as big an area as possible, taking down as many targets as they can. Now, when you use those in civilian areas, when you use them not on trenches, not as they're designed to be used, however unpleasant that is as well, but on a children's hospital, what do they think is going to be the end result? You get high levels of civilian casualties, and that's what this report has highlighted today. I must say it's not just limited to Kharkiv. I've personally seen cluster munitions where they've been used in two other locations. Kramatorsk in the Donbass, where there was an attack on a railway station that left about 60 people dead, and I saw the marks there myself. And then just a couple of days ago, I was around the outskirts of Kyiv, and there was an old lady who had the shell, the kind of container of a cluster shell in her back garden. So really, this is not just limited to this city, although Kharkiv has been hit particularly hard.
And Russia just simply denies it. Their main attention, Russia's main attention, is on Severodonetsk, isn't it, in the east? And we're just seeing reports this morning that Ukrainian forces have been pushed back from the centre of Severodonetsk. What are you hearing?
Basically, that there is an inexorable march, it seems, of the Russians. There's been conflicting reports over the last few weeks. This is the main focal point of their assault into the Donbass. And we've heard reports initially of them taking most of the city. Then there was a Ukrainian counterattack that pushed them back, took about half of it back. But now they are gradually marching. They've pushed the Ukrainians out of the centre. We think they're now in an industrial area. And indeed, just 36 hours ago or so, we had reports of this chemical plant that was shelled, a chemical plant where 800 civilians are finding shelter, along with a number of Ukrainian soldiers. That being shelled, there being an oil leak and a large fire there. So really a difficult picture for the Ukrainians in Severodonetsk.
OK, thanks very much. Joe Inwood there for us in Kyiv.